Hey, I'm Josh from Vacuums R Us in Colorado, and today we're going to be working on this Simplicity Synchrony, also known as Riccar Brilliance. We're going to be doing an extensive repair on this today. The back housing right here is broken. You can see that the machine leans back inappropriately. There's a number of things that can cause that to happen, but in this case, it's the worst option, which is the back housing is actually broken, and so kind of where the locking mechanism locks in, it's broken. We always have a disclaimer on these videos that say watch at your own risk, attempt this repair at your own risk. And we always say this video is intended for the instruction of authorized service people and Riccar authorized dealerships. This time I really mean it. This is a very difficult repair. You're certainly free to try it on your own at home. I'm all about right to repair, but you need to understand that this is one of the most complex and involved repairs you can do on any vacuum, period. The reason for that is that this housing right here is the first part to hit the assembly line. I got to tour the assembly line out in Missouri a few years ago, and this is the first piece to go on, and every single component of this machine is built on top of this. So in order to replace this unit, we have to take every single piece of this vacuum cleaner apart and put it back in there again. So this is a rough repair, but what's great is if you are a Riccar tech, this is a useful video for you because you're going to get to see every single thing that's in here, see how it all interconnects, how it all works. I'm going to walk you through some of the common failure points, how to troubleshoot those failure points, talk to you about how the machine works, and how the dirt gets in and the clean air goes out ultimately. So it's a great training video if you want to brush up on these. I know a lot of technicians who probably shouldn't be technicians, to be frank, reassess your careers, are scared to death of this machine. Look, if you can't work on a tandem air and you call yourself a vacuum tech, maybe reassess some things. It's not a rocket ship. It's not a nuclear power plant. It is a vacuum cleaner. They're actually really easy machines to work on once you know how they fundamentally function. And hopefully, if you do have those fears of tandem airs, this will kind of get you over that. So there's two different models that this applies to directly. This is a Simplicity Synchrony. Simplicity no longer makes high-end machines. They don't make them under that brand anymore. They make some like cheap stuff they sell on like Walmart and Amazon under the Simplicity brand. But we're working on a Simplicity Synchrony. Their models are all going to start with SCRD, or SCR, I'm sorry. SCRD is the Synchrony Deluxe. But they all start with the SCRD, and this applies to all of those. They also made an identical machine, different coloration, under Riccar, and that was the Riccar Brilliance. And those model numbers start with BRL. Everything in here is going to apply exactly to those two series of machines. All the screws are in the same place. The components are all the same. I'm going to link to the schematics below so that if you need the blown out part diagrams, there's probably some other videos on there that are related to those machines too you can check out. But I'm going to link to that below. If you need parts, you can actually order them off the diagrams too. This sort of applies to the more modern machines. So the S30, the Simplicity S30, was the next generation in this product line. That was discontinued 6 years ago when they moved Simplicity to Amazon and the kind of the cheapy stuff. But the modern version is the Riccar R30. That's the modern version of this machine. And a lot of this is applicable. Some of the housing has changed, right? So if you're working on an R30 and you're looking at this video, you may see like this screw is over here, but on the R30, maybe it's over there. Fundamentally though, they work in the same basic concept, the same basic idea. Some of the electronics are a little different, but like the wire runs are essentially the same, and where stuff hooks up is going to be the same. So it's useful if you're working on a more modern machine. Likely though, if you're doing a housing replacement, it's going to be on a machine of this generation. They're great machines, but plastic fatigues. We see it a lot here in Colorado. It's very dry. So if you're doing a housing replacement, you're probably working on this generation to begin with, not one of the newer machines, because they haven't really seen that kind of fatigue yet. So we're going to get into it. Okay, so I'm going to start from the bottom of the machine. Take the hose off so it doesn't flop around, but we're going to start from the bottom. I do have the handle on right now. Our benches are waist height for this reason. We can put the machine right here and we can start on the bottom of these machines. It's well placed for that. All right, so the sole plate is held on these machines with 4 screws. That's different from its big brother, the R40, which has 2 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. I note that there's a screw missing right here. So one great thing about these machines is that almost all the screws are the same size. Riccar / Simplicity, Tacony Corporation, they intend these machines to be maintained and repairable. In order to even sell the machines, you have to be an authorized service center, and you have to have trained techs who can maintain the machines under warranty and do repairs on them. So they're very forward thinking when they're designing the machines. even down to little things like make all the screws the same size. That makes things so much easier. So you don't really need to worry about different screw sizes. There are a couple in here which are obvious, and I will point that out as we go. So I'm going to take the base plate off. I'm a little concerned that the screw right here was missing. Oftentimes the screw is missing because the connection here where the screw goes into is broken. In this case, it's not. The screw's just flat out missing. So we'll just go ahead and put another screw in there when we get down to it. I'm going to remove the brush roll, and we're going to set that aside. Now we're going to take out the remaining screws. I've got one here, one, and then behind the wheels there are screws. So 1, 2, 3, 4 screws are going to be taken out here. All right, my magnetic tip is not working great, so the screws are still in there. When I flip it up, I'm going to be careful to make sure I don't lose them. All right, so now we have the machine in an upright position again. We're going to remove the handle assembly to make the machine easier to work on. One trick I use consistently is I zip tie the cord together. As you're working on these machines, you'll find the cords will fall off, and then you've got cord all over the place, and it's a total pain. So I zip tie the cords to keep things organized. There's one single screw back here. It is a long silver screw. It's one of the few different screws on the machine. Remove that screw, and the handle will just pop off. All right, so we're gonna recline the machine. If we can recline the machine. That's part of the issue, is that the recline mechanism on this is broken. So there we go. And I'll show you what's broken after we get better access to it and why we're doing this repair. Remove the bag door, get that out of the way. We will remove the bag. All right, now this hood should now come right off. Those are the screws that we removed from the bottom. And now we're into the innards. On the newer machines, these headlights have been replaced with an LED strip that's right here. But this is the older machine. They use traditional headlights. So we're going to have to basically take all this stuff off, and then we're going to separate it from this and rip this whole thing out. So I'm going to take the belt, get that out of the way. This shroud right here is going to need to come off, and in order to do that, I need to remove this light right here. So here we have one of the more unusual screws. It's a silver screw that has a broad head. The broad head is needed to hold this down. Set that aside. Over here we have I believe it's the board that identifies that the filter is full. We're going to unplug that. It's a little clip right here. It'll slide right out. Not a big deal at all. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove that light. Same broad screw. Set that out of the way for now. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws that hold this shroud in. All right, so this will pop right up now. And we can see we have a gerbil in there. And there's a stick here as well. This machine also, the reason it came in was not to replace the back housing. The reason it came in is because it was making a loud noise. And what that loud noise was determined to be was a broken fan, likely because they were picking up sticks. So we're now going to put it in an upright position because we need to remove the spring assist. If you remove this when it's in a downward position, the spring is loaded and it will just pop up. It's under pressure. So in an upward position, there's no pressure on that spring, and there's 2 screws on either side. So there's a total of 2 screws, 1 screw on each side. All right, so now we can recline the machine again, which was difficult the first time. There we go. And now this is loose. Okay, so we've got 2 metal brackets here which screw into the lower housing and then sort of hold the upper housing and allow it to pivot. We're going to be removing those. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to undo these wire retainers here though, because we are going to need to fully detach the upper housing from the lower housing. And the wires flow through the upper housing into the lower housing. So you've got a hall sensor right here, which has this plug right here. We'll unhook that. And then there's a ground wire that's in right there as well. I'm just going to unscrew that ground wire. And that is a silver ground screw. And I believe it's also a machine screw because it's going into the metal hall sensor. So now this is no longer connected to the base. The only thing we have holding the upper housing onto the base now is the metal brackets. So there's 2 screws on each side of this. So now the upper housing will lift up. All right, and so we have the one metal bracket from the side. The other metal bracket, the wire goes through it, so that's not going to come off right now. I'm going to leave that in there for now. And then we can take, I'm going to set the upper housing aside momentarily. So this is an older machine. It's really dirty, so I want to wash this. It's easier than trying to blow it off and clean it. But I do have one electrical component left. That's the Hall sensor right here. So I'm going to pull the Hall sensor off so I can safely put this in the sink. And there's a spring right here. The spring is what holds this thing down and makes contact with the belt. The Hall sensor, it detects whether there's a jam. So if the belt stops spinning, the brush stops spinning or whatever, this little thingy right here will stop spinning and it'll shut the machine off. But this spring is what causes the Hall sensor to maintain pressure. One more screw holding this black bracket down, and then the whole thing will come off. And you can see why we want to wash this. It's going to be much easier. I'm going to go dip this real quick, soak it, get it cleaned, and then we'll move on to the upper housing. All right, so now we have the lower housing is drying, and we're going to tear into the upper housing. So we've got this wire hanging off here. We can't get this off yet, this metal clasp. So we're going to remove the filters. I'm going to dispose of these. This machine has not been well maintained, and it is in for filter replacement as well. And then we're going to expose the motor. So there's a plastic ring here that goes on right here. On the other side, there's a plastic ring as well, but there's also this gasket, and this frequently gets lost or forgotten to get put on in the final stages, so don't forget to put this back. And then there's another plastic ring on this side, which often needs some help with a screwdriver to get off. All right, so with those removed, I'm going to remove the motor cover. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws. Motor cover will pop off. Again, I'm just going to hose this down because it's filthy and that's easier. There is a screen right here. It's not really so much a filter. It's a screen I'm going to remove so we don't get that wet. All right, so now that we're into the motor section, so this is why we call them a tandem air. Both of these motors generate airflow, which is very unique to this machine and is part of the reason why Riccar gets the kind of performance that they get out of these machines, because they use this really unique design. So I'm going to pull this motor. There is one screw that holds this motor in. It's right there. So the check-in diagnostic diagnosed that this motor has a bad fan, which we're going to look at momentarily. So motor has 2 clips. They are color-coded, and so no need to mark or worry about that. We'll set that aside for the moment. We will look at that fan momentarily. All right, so next we're going to go ahead and remove this motor right here. It looks like the motor mount had fallen off of that, which is interesting. So again, there's just 2 wire connections here. There's actually 3 in this case. There's a yellow one as well. Yellow goes to blue. All right, so we'll set that aside, and we'll look at this motor a little bit later. For now, we're going to continue to take stuff out of this machine. So we've got a few things going on here. We have the printed circuit board, which we're going to need to carefully remove. Notice this shroud right here that covers the fuse was moved. It's bizarre. All right, so I'm going to pull the board up. It just slides down in. I'm going to pull it up so I can get access to the cords and cables. And then I'll pause right there for 1 second for you to look at how those hoses are ran. All right, and so what I do is I unhook the hoses on one side, like that, and then I unhook them from the body on the other side so that I don't get them confused. Looks like somebody's already been in here and they actually did some scribbling on the hoses too. All right, so this is a Molex connector. There's a clip right here. Be careful, these boards are, I don't remember if they're available or not. I remember one of these boards is discontinued, so don't break it. So now the board is out, and now we have a whole bunch of wires. Right here is a winged rocker switch. This switch is what turns the brush roller off when you put the machine in an upright position. And this switch is actually something that can fail. More commonly, the failure is when we put this back together, novice technicians will catch the bottom side of this switch where they're dropping the upper housing back into the lower housing, and they'll break the switch. They get the whole machine together, and now their brush roll won't turn on anymore, and it's usually because they broke this putting it back together. But these switches can fail. That is a possible failure point. You can test that with a multimeter if you're ever dealing with that. So remove the switch. We also have the thermal right here. So this is what senses if the motor overheats. It's basically a thermostat. And these are two screws that are actually a little bit shorter than the other screws that hold this thermal in place. That, man, these things are tight. It's an old machine. It's been in service for a while. All right, so our thermal is out. I'm going to pull these hoses now. So there's a gasket here that seals the motor in, and I'm pretty sure we're going to need that on the new housing, so I'll just remove it for now. I don't think the housing comes with that. Yeah, it doesn't have those gaskets I just removed. The other thing it does not have is the bag dock. So we'll want to remove that. I think I'll go ahead and remove that and just place it directly on the new housing. There's also the handle cover right here. We'll need to come off. Okay, so there is a seal, a gasket right here underneath this handle cover that we're going to replace and put back on here. That seals off the back compartment. I'll go ahead and put the thermal in here real quick. All right, and then we have this little slide right here, which the airflow sensors hook up to and allows the airflow sensor to connect into the back compartment. I think that's all we got on this side. So we're going to go around to the other side, and we're going to start pulling out this wiring. This wire loom feeds in to that side, and it's going to come back out this way if I remember correctly. Okay, so we got bunches of stuff here, and I think to simplify things, what we'll do is we'll just do a swap over where we swap the parts from one side, from the old to the new. All right, so I'm going to pop this puppy off. Set that aside. Set that aside. Changeover valve cover. And then this right here covers, so this micro switch, this wing micro switch right here is actually a common failure point, and you can see why. It's not great. There's a bit of a leak there, and I mean, this is 15 years worth of dirt, but dirt gets inside these things and the switches will fail. And what this switch does is it turns off your brush roller when your tools are engaged. So for those of you who own these machines, you turn this, it turns your tools on, and this switch is what actually turns the brush roll off. Sometimes these will fail, and your brush roll won't work because just this switch has failed. And as you saw, it only had one screw to get into here, and then there's one screw holding it in. It's actually a relatively straightforward repair compared to a lot of them. And it's easy to test with a multimeter too. And it's pretty common, pretty high failure that we see those, and a real easy fix. So this is an unusual screw as well. This is a small, it's a very narrow silver screw. And we'll set that switch aside. All right, and now we're ready to take this back cover off, and this covers the wires and all kinds of stuff. So on the newer machines, right here, this piece is a separate piece, so you can open this up and you can get direct access into the fan chamber. So on the newer machines, this is actually a separate piece entirely. It's a pretty good design. You can see the dirt that's managed to work its way in here over the years, getting past these seals into this right here. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to actually blow that out outside. That I'm not going to put in the sink because we need to get it put back on pretty quickly. But I'm going to blow that out outside so that we've got some of the dirt off, and then I'm going to clean up right here where we're going to be contacting the new seals so that we get a good seal and we get less of this going on here. There's a couple of tool clips we need to change over. So there's one right here. And they make these tool clips removable because they can break because of, you know, you're clipping tools in over and over again. So they make these removable on this so that if they break, it's an easy and cheap fix. All right, I think that's everything off of here. Oh, and I promised I was going to show you what was actually broken. So this is what was broken. So this plastic piece right here is replaceable because it's what the locking device that locks the machine in an upright position comes in contact with, and it rubs across here and then it locks in right there. So this piece is replaceable so that if it wears out or breaks, you can just take this piece off and you can replace it, which is a great idea. Unfortunately, in this case, what happened was where this piece screws into the body is what broke, where it screws into the body right there. So that's why we have to replace the body, because we can't, this stupid little plastic piece can no longer attach to the body. I haven't seen it happen very often. I honestly think the machine probably was dropped to cause that to happen, because normally what I see is this piece wears out or breaks or whatever, and it's easy, it's 2 screws, you swap this out, it's a cheap piece, not a big deal. All right, so we need to get the wires out. There's a Molex connector right here, which I don't have great visibility on because there's a lot of dirt. So I just noticed a little plastic piece broke off here. And this is actually part of this right here. And that probably explains why we had as much dirt leaking as we did, because this thing wasn't screwed down as tight as it should be, because this was broken. So we've got another broken piece here. Now this is something, it's not pretty. I've already put a lot of money into this. I believe I can actually fix this by applying a washer to this screw that goes in here, a slightly larger screw, putting a washer in there, and then we'll be able to tamp that down. Okay, so this has got to come out. It's clamped on both sides. Press one side, and then the other side, and then boom, got it out. And so there's a sealing strip right here, which we'll remove, and then this wire will go through there. All right, and I believe we've got everything off this housing we need. Oh, we actually need this piece. The piece that was the problem. I think that's everything we need. I'm going to set it aside for now. All right, and now we'll start putting this thing back together. All right, so I've got some sealing strips that I'm going to apply here. So we're going to put our short strip on first. All right, and now we're going to put the long sealing strip on. So I have a little bit of overhang here, which I'm going to slice off. I barely had enough to make it over there. So now we're going to get the wiring back into the machine. So this Molex connector, and these are the 2 pieces that go into the micro switch. I'm going to feed them in from this side. So the Molex connector will just snap in. Your brown and white wires will be on the top, and you'll hear a distinctive snap when it goes in. I'm going to clean this up a little bit where the seal is going to set with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. All right, so this seal right here goes over that. Okay, now we can put the cover on. There's a hook right here. We'll put that in right there. And then you'll feed the 2 micro switch wires through that slot there. And it should set in pretty firmly. So I'm going to screw all of this down. And then I'm going to address this right here. All right, so what I got was a slightly longer plastic screw that has an integrated, sort of an integrated washer. It's got a bigger head on it to put in here to sort of bypass the broken piece. Oh yeah, that's good. All right, that's in. Next we'll put this valve back. We'll put our micro switch back on. And it doesn't matter how this plugs in. It's just all it is a brake, so it doesn't matter how that goes. And again, this is one of the unusual screws. This is a very small silver screw that goes in here. Getting the wires shoved in here is always a pain in the butt. There's just not enough room, and I don't know why. So you kind of just squashing stuff in there, kind of YOLOing it. There we go. All right, I believe that's everything for this side. So we can flip it and go back to putting the motors and the PCB in. All right, so we're gonna redo the wires in here. I'm gonna hook up the thermal first. So on the thermal, your short wire is going to go into the, in this case, the pink connector down here. And then your longer wire is gonna go into the blue. All right. There's a wire channel right here to tuck this into, and then that zip is going to be on that side. It kind of holds it into place. Over here we have the that winged rocker switch, and it doesn't matter which goes into which here because this is just a cut switch. Put that in, and then the zip again. The zip goes on that side, and then those wires just kind of tuck down inside there. There's a pretty good sized compartment there for the winged rocker switch to sit in. And this wire goes off to the direct air motor over here. We'll put in the PCB first, then we'll return the direct air motor after we have done that. So our PCB is going to go in right here. There's only one way you can plug this Molex in. And then the PCB will slide in there. And remember, we had these two hoses here. It doesn't actually matter which goes to which. All right, so these hoses, the straight hoses are going to go straight into the back compartment sensor right here. I usually kind of slide the PCB down and then use the needle nose to get the hoses reseated in there. And it actually doesn't matter as long as these two hoses are going to this block and then these two hoses are going to these suction channels here. It actually doesn't matter which ones they go into. These two need to go in one of those two and these two need to go in one of those two. All right, so our hoses are in. This black wire snakes around and ends up going out here. And then this right here, this black wire goes to our direct air motor, and this is the wire, these are the wires that go into the clean air motor right here. And remember, your blue wire goes into yellow on this, and then the black and white are coded. So just remember your wire loom that has your blue wire is the one that goes to the clean air motor. So your blue wire loom goes to your clean air motor, and then the one that's just black and white coming off the Molex connector goes in there. And got our motor mount right here. I don't love how this gasket right here is kind of peeled up and around, so I'm going to try to straighten it out. There we go. tuck all that there out of the way. All right. And I promised we were going to look at this fan. Now's the time to do it, I suppose. So I can actually, I don't know if the camera's able to pick it up, but I can look right in here and I can see that the fan is cracked. I can see the breakage on the fan. So we're going to go ahead and replace the fan on this. Relatively common repair. I mean, one of the Achilles heel of these direct air motors is that all the debris does pass through the fan. They have amazing airflow. They're really high performing, but if you pick up sticks and stones and drywall screws and nuts and bolts and stuff you shouldn't, you're going to break your fan. So this gasket right here is replaceable, but if you cut it really carefully, you don't need to replace it. So you can see there's a seam right here. This outer fan housing is going to come off. This piece is going to come off to access the fan, and there's a seam right down the middle here. So I'm going to cut that, and then I'm going to find that same seam around in here, and I'm going to cut this so I don't tear it. All right, and then we've got, I believe it's 4. Oh, nope, it's actually 3 screws on here. So 1, 2, and 3. Not the screws that are holding the motor casing on, but down here, the lower screws. And these screws have the same thread pattern as the rest of the screws in the machine. Essentially, they're the same size, but they're slightly different color than the other ones. I think these motors are manufactured somewhere else. So I set these 3 screws aside because they're kind of a matte color. All right. So when you're doing these fan replacements, you want to look at the fan housing and make sure that there's no damage, because sometimes when the fan breaks, and you can see the chunk taken out of it right there, sometimes when the fan breaks, this chunk will get stuck somewhere as this motor's spinning, and it can crack, you know, the motor housing, or it can crack the fan cover. So I need to get a driver for this. All right, so this is 7/16 nut, and that puppy is on tight, so I'm going to have to hold the motor. I'm going to hold onto the shaft on one end. This is reverse threaded. Okay, so we've got a washer on top of the fan. A lot of times these fans are really hard to get off because they're just, I mean, this fan has been on this motor for 15 years. And there's really no big secret to getting them off. You just wiggle it back and forth, and you wiggle it back and forth. I might put a dot of WD-40 right there. And you can put a flathead under there. You have to be careful not to damage the housing in the process. Sometimes that can help to break it loose. I could tell you how many techs I have had get to this point in a repair and call me and go, how do you get the fan off? There's no secret, but I wish there was a secret. You do want to be careful if you're using a screwdriver. There's a lip around here. You don't want to put your screwdriver in there and then bend that lip. There we go. All right, a little bit of hair down there. I'm going to pull that stuff out. There's a fiber washer right there. Take that hair off, return the fiber washer. I'll wipe up any residual WD-40. I hate that stuff. All right. So see how easy it just goes right back on, like there was no struggle to get it off? So if any of you have seen my videos on fan replacement on Riccar Superlights, you may remember that I'm a big fan of putting some silicone between the fan housing and the motor as a sealant. I do the same thing here, particularly here, because this chamber right here is the last place we want to start building up debris in these machines. So I just put a ring of silicone around here, especially if I've got an old fan housing, a 15-year-old fan housing that I'm putting back together. Chances are over time there's plastic fatigue, and stuff's just not going to fit back together as perfectly as it came apart. And I'll put a little bit of silicone there, which will seal up that little bit of a crack that we created there. See how that moves a little bit? I'm going to tighten that screw down right there when I'm putting this back together to resolve that issue. Probably that happened when they broke the fan. They ran over something they shouldn't have, cracked the fan, and just kind of Put the fan housing back in first. I'll tighten up those motor screws. All right, this puppy is ready to go back in. Go ahead and plug this in. These are color coded, so super easy, white to white, black to black. On these machines, it's a regular old, same screw as the rest. One screw holds down the clean air motor. And this wire sneaks around here. All right, I'm going to put the spring right in here. Don't forget to put this in. I can't tell you how many times I have forgot to put this back in and had to rip the whole machine apart again after I went to go and install the filter. I just remembered I forgot to put these gaskets in right here. So I'm going to pop the motor out. That one goes right there, and then this one goes right there. It's the only place they can go. All right, we removed this motor screen because we washed this piece in this sink, so we're going to put the screen back in. All right, all our wires are set. I'm going to actually let this micro switch stay out because this micro switch, after we cap all this on, we can push it in. It's got these little tabs right here. We can push it in, and that makes it a little bit easier sometimes than putting casing on to have the switches out like that. It gives you a little bit more room because, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we have to line up here. Looks good. I'm going to screw it down, pop that in. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4. I think one up there. 5 screws in. And then this winged rocker switch right here will actually just press in now. It was easier to get it together and then push it in after the fact. So I have one ring on this side. There are notches on these rings. You'll line those up. And there we go. All right, and then there's a notch on the other side. All right, now we are ready to drop this into the lower housing. So here we have our cleaned lower housing. On the upper housing, we still have one metal bracket that just accidentally fell in there. And then on the other side, we have the other metal bracket that is not on at the moment. And we also have the gasket I mentioned you will want to not forget to put back on. So put that gasket back on, put this metal bracket back on. And so this is a little tricky. So you kind of have to hold both of these brackets on both sides at the same time and then sort of line up these metal brackets with the channels they go in while keeping that gasket on, and then drop the upper housing into the lower housing, being careful not to catch the winged rocker switch back here on the lower housing and breaking it in the process. All right, so that's in there. I guess I'll run the wires now. So the black wire over here is going to run through this channel here. And then it runs up and around there. I'm going to put the cover on. We'll screw that down. All right, so our one light. And remember, we have these silver screws with kind of the integrated washers. Careful not to tamp these down too much. Real easy to push these down too hard and then break your lenses. All right, and then we'll plug the sensor wire in over there. I'm going to reinstall the Hall sensor. Wire goes through up there. So there's 2 screws that hold the plastic plate that retains the Hall sensor, and then there's 1 screw that holds the spring in. So that goes down there. And I'm going to put this wire retainer in right here so this wire doesn't come out on me while we're messing around here. And this plugs in up here. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to screw down the metal brackets. So there's 2 screws on each side that hold down the metal brackets. This side's easy. Over here, it's easy to drop a screw in there while you're doing this, so it helps if you have a magnetized bit. I have a barely magnetized bit. All right. And, oh, I shouldn't have put that wire in. I didn't have the ground cable yet. So remember, the ground cable is held to the Hall sensor with a small Phillips machine screw, silver one. Don't mess around and forget to do ground cables. Anybody who knows anything about these machines know that there's been a lot of talk of static affecting the PCBs, the printed circuit boards on these. It's actually correct. Riccar's worked hard to try to resolve that issue. In their latest versions of the R30 in particular, they're very resilient to static. The R40 has gotten a lot better. It just really depends on where you live. Some areas are just very high static, like here in Colorado. And we see a lot of issues overall with static impacting PCBs here, and then on other brands, which don't allow us to say anything unpleasant about them on the internet. So we're not going to mention those other brands that are made in Germany. All right, 1 more wire retainer right there. And I don't remember if there was one on here. On the new machines, there's a zip tie right there that holds that wire there, kind of out of the way of the belt. I don't think there was one on this, but I'm going to put one here anyway. All right, quick look around for extra parts. I don't see any extra parts, so that's probably good. So this lower housing, we washed it. This right here, the height adjustment, as part of regular service, we'd be doing this anyway, but particularly so since we washed this machine. I'm going to apply grease. I'm going to apply grease to the height adjustment channel right there. All right, so we got some grease on in there. I'll put some grease on the other side too. All right, so I'm going to put it in an upright position now, and then I'm going to reattach the spring assist. All right, now we're cooking with gas. I'm going to go ahead and install the filters. So on the new R30, the new version of this machine, the filter is this size. The filter that goes right here. On the old Brilliant, whatever symmetry, whatever they're called, the filter is significantly smaller. So if you get the new filter package, you need to cut the filter to fit right there. Regardless, I need to find a filter grill there because that is missing, which I did not notice at first. All right, so filter's installed. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install the brush roller and the belt and the bag and the handle. We're going to do a test before we put the hood on. That way we don't have to, if something goes wrong, we don't have to rip the whole thing apart again. We're going to test before that. I'm going to service the brush roll real quick. Rubber caps come off of these. All right, so I serviced the brush roll. We're now going to reinstall the brush. So you slide the belt underneath the Hall sensor around the motor. When I do the belts on these, I usually do them like this, which is different than the way I usually install belts. And I'm going to take the brush and I'm going to put the belt through there. I'm going to hand roll to make sure that everything is set properly. And it is. Okay. All right. So put a new bag in this puppy. Attach the bag door. All right. Next, we will put the handle assembly back on. There we go. All right, so the one large screw goes back in here and holds the handle in. All right. So I'm going to cut the zip tie that I put up here. We'll go ahead and we'll run one final test on this. Oh, you know what? Forgot to put the base plate on. Probably ought to do that before we power this baby up.
Okay, so at this point in the video, for some reason, all of the audio cut out. I don't really have anything important to say here other than I'm putting the base plate back on. But I do point out here that one of the screws on this machine is much longer than the other ones. And that's because the housing broke down here where that screw goes in. So we used a longer screw to dig into the housing. And that is super common on tandem airs.
All right, so at this point, all that was left is putting the hood on, putting the handle back on with a single screw in the back, and putting the base plate. We had the 4 screws that held the base plate on. We've got the machine back together again. It is fully functional. Going to button it up, do a spit polish on it, and this machine will be good to go. Now you know about everything there is to know about the Riccar and Simplicity Tandem Air, the Brilliance and the Synchrony versions. Hopefully, if you were afraid to work on them before, you're either more afraid now or you feel confident.